Hi, welcome back. Today I'm going to talk about a novel called Solar by Ian McEwan. Will there be a hero who invents something to solve climate change? Does climate change matter? Are we being too gloomy about the problem? Stay with me here to learn some answers to these questions. In this novel, the point of view character is called Michael Beard, which in itself is an amusing name to be called Beard. And that's how this novel is written. It's written in a very amusing way mostly. However, there is great seriousness to the subject, of course. So in part one, we learn that in the year 2000, Beard's wife called Patrice is having an affair with a builder called Tarpon. And this is a bit different because it's usually Beard who's having the affairs. There's an interesting passage about the way that people imagine the end of the world as their own lives are coming to an end. When Beard is speaking to a colleague called Aldous, we learn that Beard thinks that political types enjoy catastrophe. In other words, he's a very ugly, kind of cynical guy. I know scientifically trained people who are like this. They just think political discourse is pointless. Eventually, Beard confronts Tarpon at Tarpon's house, and there is an amusing confrontation. Beard is amusingly unintimidated by a big rough builder type. So then Beard is invited to the Arctic on a trip with some scientists and artists to investigate the melting of the ice caps. Beard travels to the Arctic on an airplane, and they go in snowmobiles to a ship. While staying on the ship for a week, Beard meets lots of artists who are really emotionally concerned about climate change, but Beard just isn't really bothered. He doesn't see it as the crisis that the artistic types see it as. While on the ship, he gives a lecture, but he feels so divorced from the artists on the ship because idealism is just not in his nature. When they come on to the ship, having spent time outside, they have to put all their gear into the boot room. As a group, they can't even keep that tidy, so Beard reflects, if they can't even keep that tidy, how are they gonna sort out the huge climate problem? When Beard gets back to his house in London, he discovers Aldous at his home, and it's presumed that he's been having an affair with Beard's wife as well. So there is much argument between them. Ultimately, Aldous dies in an accident which has nothing really to do with Beard, because Aldous just falls. So we've got a little kind of crime story within this novel. I feel like this little crime story is almost being written to kind of pad the story out, the novel out. Somehow it's thought that Tarpin killed Aldous, and so he's put away for 16 years. This is concluded largely because he was violent to Patrice. Beard picks up Aldous's file, and that's just an indication of what's to come in the rest of the novel, because Beard kind of steals intellectual property by taking up Aldous's file. Part 2 starts with Beard in a plane and then in a train, because he kind of tours around the world to give lectures. There's a really amusing scene where a fellow passenger starts eating Beard's crisps. And I really enjoyed that scene. I thought it was very amusing. Beard gives a lecture on climate change. I enjoyed this lecture. He gives us the fundamentals about climate change. Beard says the aim is middle class expansion and also a resolution to the climate problem. And that is a darkly comic thing to say, because there's a massive contradiction there. There are other amusing bits to this speech, such as he says, "We are on this rock together." Beard talks about the opportunity to expand renewable energy and make a lot of money. He says this is the future and the old paradigm makes way for the new. Then we learn extensively about Beard's new partner called Melissa, who has a chain of dance studios across the north of London. Beard and Melissa then spend time together. In part 3, we immediately learn about Beard's background. Exactly where Beard is at this moment is not set out. I find this to be a bit of a weakness in Ian McEwan's writing. Exactly where you are can be a little unclear at times. We learned that Beard went to Oxford and felt a little intimidated by the art students because they were able to talk in great detail about authors. Beard pursued a fellow student who was studying an art subject and tried to learn a great deal about a particular author to impress this student. In the end, they married, so it worked. Beard is reflecting upon all this while he is at an airport waiting to go to the United States. Beard continues to think about his first wife called Maisie while he is in a bar in the United States waiting for his colleague called Hammer. Beard talks about climate change as if it's a good thing because it's an opportunity to sell things when talking to his colleagues, which adds to the ugliness of this comically unattractive kind of guy. So Hammer and Beard go off in a vehicle to a site where they are gonna set up a kind of base to mitigate climate change with a certain technology. And we learn about all the sites that Beard sees on the way and hear more about his reflections. Beard finds out that evidently Tarpon has come to the United States to look for him. So they get to the site. Beard sees Tarpon, and Tarpon apologizes to Beard for having an affair with Beard's wife. By the end of the conversation, they fall out already. Beard is accused by a lawyer of theft of Aldous' intellectual property. Of misappropriating Aldous' intellectual property. At the end of the novel, Darlene and Melissa search Beard out, no doubt to tell him off for being so promiscuous. I would prefer to read a non-fiction book on the climate crisis rather than a book of fiction on it. I thought there were a few too many kind of scientific details communicated. At the same time, I think it's great that authors grapple with the subject of climate change. I would myself prefer him to have focused the story on what it was like on the boat. I heard in an interview that this book was researched by reading The New Scientist, Nature, and Einstein's biography. So this just goes to show that those who specialize in the sciences can make great writers. I myself did literature, but everyone can have a go at writing. I thought this novel was quite good. I'd give it 3.5 stars out of 5. I did find it highly amusing at times, but I didn't feel like it was a remarkable climate change book at all. I thought the writing was often very eloquent and good, and I thought some of the ideas were brilliant, but just too much of the novel was nothing special to me. Thanks for watching. See you next time.